our nature as human beings to implement and craft tools into our daily lives. It's human to do this, and some would even say we're fundamentally lazy, as we do anything to make our future tasks easier. But it is this optimization of our experiences that sets our species apart from all others. While our ancestors crafted tools with stones to have easier access to food, I crafted a unique and personal tool that helped me overcome seemingly perpetual hardships in my life. That tool is B.R.I.T, balance, river, independence, and telescope. And I'll be taking you along the journey as I overcame that and discovered it. And I'll be starting this journey a little out of chronological order and in the least favorable part of high school for some, junior and senior year. Junior and senior year, I was in a toxic, unhealthy relationship. This person was utterly suffocating, demanding, controlling, and set unrealistic standards. I found myself going to extreme measures to satisfy this person, and it got to the point where my mental health was absolute chaos, and all I knew was stress. And now you're probably wondering, who would do this thing to such a poor girl? And you're looking right at her. I'm the culprit. I created such an intense and unsafe environment in my head where I could never escape the stress. But it was simply because I wanted the best for myself, and I knew that meant challenges. I developed an unhealthy relationship with challenging myself, assuming that the more difficult the challenge, the more rewarding, and the absolute maximum challenges, the better. And the detriment of this relationship crept slowly into my life, beginning with overloading my fall schedule senior year. On average, I'd start my days at 6 a.m. and end them at 2 a.m. the next day, starting with 7 classes and extra in the morning, to leading a community service organization, to leading a youth city council and 2 passion projects, to college applications, and to the heavy workload of the International Baccalaureate, or IB program. I rarely had time to spare, but somehow I was unstoppable. I maintained this high on productivity for months, and foolishly, I thought this would persist, but inevitably, I crashed, and as the spring and my 20-some IB final exams approached, my productivity and drive plummeted. My performance physically, academically, and mentally was at an all-time low, and I didn't recognize myself anymore. Where did the highly motivated, passionate, and focused Eden go? That was it. The fact that I didn't acknowledge the highly important correlation and causation between those features. You can't expect a reasonable supply of focus and drive without a reasonable dose of passion. That was the difference between my fall and spring. I absolutely loved and thrived in what I was doing, making a difference in my community through my organizations and projects, pursuing my career interests in sustainability, helping others through my leadership, having my voice heard, and having a high performance in physical activity. I was truly in a state of bliss and satisfaction. I was grieving the loss of what felt like my social success and dreams in high school. My life was out of my control. And after my loved one suggested therapy, I felt the weight of stigma as I protested. Eventually I complied, but entered with a closed mind. I consider myself a pretty emotionally attuned and self-aware individual, so what does this person really have to offer to me? Well, one day her power struck me. One day, when I was complaining about what could have been without my ankle injury, she basically told me, Eden, you can't change the past, so why focus so much emotional and mental energy focusing on what could be, rather than to direct that towards your recovery and trying your best, because that's the only and best thing that you can do. And that sentence and that statement put the control of my life back into my hands. As simple and obvious as that statement is, try your best, that's the only and best thing you can do, it resonated intensely with me and lingered throughout my entire recovery journey. Feeling left out in the team, try your best to fit in. We're scared to go through contact again, don't get in your own way. I was trying my best, and that's the only thing that I could do. And that's where River comes in. And as cliche as it may sound, I needed to go with the flow. You can't change the past and, the injuries inflicted upon you, but you can change the direction in which you go. And that's going with the current, not against it. And as the Dutch motivational speaker Wim Hof stated, life is like a river. The way of life is to flow with the current. To turn against it takes effort, but the current will carry you if you let it. And this whole time, I was going against it. But eventually, I did what Wim Hof said, and I went with the current, and it carried me into 2 severe concussions my sophomore and junior year. Now, brain injuries are challenging in ways intensely unlike physical injuries. With injuries like a ACL tear or broken ankle, you have a reasonably predictable timeline in recovery. But with your unique and precious brain, recovery is frightening and unknown. You look normal on the outside, no crutches or brace, but you're a completely different person on the inside. And I felt the gravity of my injury whenever I was visiting my neuropsychologist at St. Jude's Research Hospital in Washington, D.C. I was performing manageable tests, but this whole time I was trying to convince myself the mildness of my brain damage. So I felt like a lab subject or an alien in a sterile white room with a scientist at the end of the table asking you questions. And so I got this, right? I had always taken the most challenging and high-level courses in school offered to me, so simple problems couldn't beat me. They rarely did. But then the doctor gave me a simple elementary multiplication problem. My mind began racing in nothingness. Like a car in intense fog, I couldn't orient myself. I couldn't coordinate my logic to solve this simple math problem. And eventually, I broke into tears, sobbing, a complete mental breakdown over a simple elementary math problem. It was so hard for myself to watch me become so weak mentally. My logic, cognitive abilities, emotional intelligence were my most prized possessions, features that I unapologetically took pride in and optimized. And to have this stripped from me was utterly defeating. These were seemingly undetachable features from me, and they were stripped. And when they were stripped from me, I was then grieving the loss of myself. This logic and intelligence made me who I was in the classroom and on the soccer field. And to no longer have that, once again, was utterly defeating. But I knew better than to dwell on what could have been and dwell on the past. And I went with the flow. The river carried me, and I took this logic and I tried my best, and I went with the current of life. Although you can't change what could have been, or the injuries and brain damage inflicted upon myself, I could change the path of my journey. And that was from being negative and resistant to being positive, accepting, and resilient. And so, whenever you take this approach, you can bounce back and life can be more enjoyable. And so when you go with the flow, you need to trust it, and it'll take you through some bends and curves, but it will only do that to show you beautiful and shaping experiences. And through this, life can be so much more enjoyable. And throughout these adversities and obstacles in life, we often refer to the support and comfort of our friends, family, peers, and loved ones. And I did as well, and I valued these. And it's important to get comfort from others like friends. But it was when I removed these friends and these close individuals from my life due to toxicity, I realized how weak my relationship was with myself. When I didn't have anyone to walk in the halls with, to eat lunch with, or do study dates with, I realized how uncomfortable I was in my own presence. I didn't know what to do with myself, and so when I was forced to be alone in solidarity, I learned a little bit about myself. I learned that I'm my #1 comedian, and no one can make me laugh as much as myself. And I also learned what makes me happy, and what makes me feel the most like myself the most, and how to handle emotions of mine. So this is where independence comes into play. This independence was empowering and evoked the evolution of myself mentally. I was able to conquer tasks in solidarity, and I wasn't a loser or anything, I fought the stigma of being, alone. If anything, I think that made me pretty cool, because who wouldn't want to be around someone who is so secure in themselves and who enjoys their own time as much as they do with others? I mean, that's my kind of person, but. So, I just challenge you, next time, whenever you're looking for someone, when you're doing something, do it by yourself. Whenever you accomplish things by yourself, your self-reliance and self-respect and sense of accomplishment becomes much stronger, and you get to know yourself a little more. So I challenge you to learn through yourself and become your best friend through independence. And so, as I've been talking about strengthening that relationship in your head and having a stronger mental state, we can sometimes become trapped within it. With our thoughts spiraling and we're focusing on so many minor details, it can become overwhelming and almost paralyzing. But this is where telescope comes in. Through telescope, I realize that when we zoom out, we can realize the details and we can get clues to help us throughout these solutions. We can allocate all this mental energy and time more effectively and not just dwelling on the minor details, and allocate them towards making our solution easier. When we zoom out, we realize that our situation might not be so bad. Throughout my brain damage, the paralyzing frustration of that, whether it's college applications or changes to my social life, I zoomed out and I went with the flow as well. As daunting as this sounds, we may, throughout these adversities and obstacles in our life, we might find ourselves alone. So it's essential to have an effective tool like B.R.I.T to help guide you through those journeys. And obstacles come and go. They oscillate in your life like a cosine function. And you can tell I recovered from my concussions because I can tell you about a cosine function. So as we go through obstacles in life, and as I will continue to go through obstacles in my life, I will carry this tool with me, and I encourage you to either find your own or use mine to then find your own as well. So I challenge you to be bright, think bright, and live in a bright world. Thank you.